The journey home. Eventually, I arrived in far north Queensland. I remember thinking that I had made it. I didn't have much money in my pocket, and I certainly didn't have a grand plan for my future. But I had survived Tasmania, the cold nights, the long roads, the uncertainty, and that night beneath the gum tree. More importantly, somewhere along that road, something inside me had changed. I had discovered that I could survive. And once you learn that about yourself, the world becomes a very different place. I found work. At first, it wasn't glamorous work. I took whatever jobs came my way. I worked hard, saved what little I could, and slowly began putting one foot in front of the other. There were still difficult days. There were setbacks. There were times when I wondered whether I would ever truly get ahead. But whenever life became difficult, I remembered that cold morning in the Australian bush. I remembered waking up covered in nothing but a piece of bark, with frost covering everything around me. And I remembered the kangaroo. Somehow, that ridiculous little scene became my private reminder that things could always change. One day you can be sleeping on the ground with nothing, and the next morning, you can wake up to a world waiting for you. Years passed. I built a life. I worked. I made friends. I eventually found a place I could call home. There were people who came into my life who loved me, people who believed in me, and people who never knew just how much their kindness meant to someone who had once been sleeping in the Australian bush. I began to understand something. Success isn't always the moment you become wealthy. Sometimes success is simply waking up one morning and realizing, I'm no longer afraid of tomorrow. Then slowly, my circumstances changed. I became more established. I had opportunities I could never have imagined when I was hitchhiking north with my thumb stuck out on the side of the road. I bought things I once thought were luxuries. I traveled. I laughed. I loved. I made mistakes. I made memories. And eventually I reached an age when people began asking me about my life. How did you manage to get through those difficult years? I would smile. How do you explain an entire lifetime in a few sentences? How do you explain that sometimes the hardest chapters of your life become the chapters you treasure most? So I would tell them about the cold night. I would tell them about the trench, the fire, the buried coals, the gum tree bark, the huntsman spiders, and of course the kangaroo. People would laugh when I told them about waking up to that enormous red kangaroo staring at me. But then I'd tell them something they didn't expect. I'd tell them that if I could go back in time and meet that young person lying beneath the gum tree, I wouldn't tell them to be frightened. I wouldn't tell them that life was going to be difficult. I'd simply sit beside them and say, keep going. You have no idea how beautiful your life is going to become. And then came the biggest surprise of all. I was 72 when I finally realized that the young hitchhiker I had once been wasn't really homeless. He was simply on his way home. Home wasn't a house, it wasn't a particular town, it wasn't even a destination on a map. Home was the life he would eventually build. And that young person sleeping beside a dying fire had no idea that one day he would look back on that night with gratitude. Because that night taught me something that money could never teach me. You don't need much to begin again. Sometimes all you need is a little warmth, a little courage, and enough faith to put your thumb back out on the road. Today at 72, I can look back and say that I survived those years. More than survived them, I lived them. And whenever I think about that enormous red kangaroo standing in the frost, looking at me as if I were the strangest creature on earth, I can't help but smile. Perhaps he thought I was lost. Perhaps I was. But he didn't know what I know now. I wasn't lost. I was beginning. And the greatest surprise of all is that the cold, frightened, homeless young person who once slept on a buried fire eventually found something far more valuable than money. He found a life worth remembering. If you're frightened, uncertain, or wondering how you're ever going to make it through, remember my kangaroo. Remember the frost. Remember the little fire beneath the earth. And remember this: a difficult beginning does not mean you are heading toward a difficult ending. Sometimes the road takes you through the coldest places imaginable, only so that you can truly appreciate the warmth when you finally arrive.